Hello everyone, this is Maz. If you're hearing this message, it means you're not part of the Voices of War subscriber community and will only hear the first half of the episode. If that's enough, then I'm thrilled. However, if you're looking to dive deeper into the complexities of war, please consider subscribing to our private feed by using the link at the top of the show notes. By doing so, you'll gain access to all of our episodes, the ability to ask follow-up questions, and will become part of an exclusive community that makes this show possible. I hope you'll make the decision to join us today.
These soldiers came to me, that hurt me a lot back then. They told me, "Are you working with the Taliban?" And I said, "What did you?" They're like, "When you're with us in the operation, nothing's happening, but when you're not in the operation, we get ambushed." Sleepless nights, cold nights, and losing friends. And then you bring a man, he's gonna get released in 6 months. Like, it's more of a show than a reality. Like, you're running in the same circle and nothing's changing. And that's why the war was hard to win this war. When I was with the Afghan Special Forces, even when we were working with the U.S. Green Berets, like the ODA, we couldn't get the air support all the times. But with Task Force 241, the moment we stepped out of the wire, we had an ISR above our head, we had AC-130 above our head. The whole operation, it was different in Task Force 241. We had, not all the time, but probably maybe 70% of the times, we had more of a kill mission than a capture mission. This was one of the problems with the rules of engagement. You can't be nice to Genghis Khan's army. They're brutal. You have to be back a Genghis Khan type of thing to survive.
Hello everyone, this is Maz. Today I'm highlighting a truly remarkable event happening on the 2nd of September, both in person in Perth, Western Australia, but also virtually. Although I'm not in any way involved with this event, I'm promoting it because its mission deserves our attention. The team from Resolute, headed by Dr. Richard Muktingard, is hosting their inaugural clinical masterclass, Caring for Those Who Serve, focusing on trauma-informed care for our ADF personnel, veterans, first responders, and their families. Attendees will hear from James Hepworth of the Veteran Employment Program at Roy Hill, from Michael Winlow from Emiria to talk about therapeutic uses of medicinal cannabinoids, from Katie Stewart of Chronic Care Australia, who will delve into exercise prescription as medicine, from Dr. Alex Lim from Revive and a former guest of the pod, who will detail the potential of ketamine and its role in treating PTSD. Then Dr. Dan Pronk, an ex-special operator, a doctor, author and speaker, will take the stage as the event's plenary speaker. After a Q&A session, Paige Collins from Painless will address management and recovery from persistent pain, before Danielle Murphy from Insight covers the importance of psychosocial rehabilitation for families. The SASR chaplaincy will cover the sensitive topic of moral injury, and finally, wrapping up the day as the keynote speaker will be Cameron Watts, an ex-senior AFP officer and founder of Hemisphere East, who will detail his advocacy for first responders. Importantly, all proceeds from this event will go to the Soldiers and Sirens Western Australia charity. If you want to know more, please check out the link at the top of the show notes and save the date for an important and much-needed discussion on the care for ADF personnel, veterans, first responders, and their families. My guest today is Yousuf Sediq, a former Afghan soldier who has recently authored a book titled 5,000 Days of War, the first-hand account of an Afghan Special Forces Operator. In his book, Yousuf provides a vivid, honest, and unfiltered portrayal of the war in Afghanistan, offering a unique perspective as a native Afghan. He was born and raised in the country, and following the fall of the Taliban in 2001, initially worked as an interpreter for the coalition forces before joining the Afghan Special Forces. He ascended quickly through the ranks and ultimately became a squadron commander in a secret unit known as Task Force 241. He and his soldiers remained in Afghanistan even after the fall of Kabul in August 21, and played a key role in the security of the Kabul International Airport during the chaotic withdrawal. Yousuf joins me today to share insights from his book and provide his perspectives on the war in Afghanistan. Yousuf, thank you very much for joining me on the Voices of War.
Thanks so much. Thank you for having me. And my regards to your audience.
Good, man. This is quite an amazing book you've written. I must admit, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I found it to be very direct. And what I liked about it the most, I think, was that it was not it wasn't over-edited. In other words, your voice and the emotions behind the man that's writing the words were very evident in the book. So perhaps my first question to you, or two questions, what motivated you to write the book, and who did you write it for?
At the beginning, I didn't really want to write the stuff that I experienced because, I'm new in this country. I didn't know the Western culture. I didn't know if people are kind of very interested in this sort of topics, because especially nowadays, you see generations like people are a lot of becoming very soft, and these kind of topics are very harsh for them. So I was hesitated, but so a friend of mine recommended me this other friend, which helped me a lot through this book, Brian. He helped me so much. He motivated me. He explained a lot of the culture that I was missing and I didn't understand.
Mm-hmm.
And so that kind of gave me some motivation. And some of the former operators, like from the SEAL teams, from the Green Berets I worked with, when I talked to them, I was like, should I write a book? And especially one of the SEAL operator, Jeff, he told me, like, bro, go for it. Don't let these stories, don't bury these stories with yourself. Don't take them to the, tell people what happened. People need to know. The media didn't really cover it. So this was, motivation from these guys.
Yeah.
And on the other side, this 20 years, a lot of people paid for this throughout in this war with their blood. Whether they were Afghans, whether they were civilians, whether they were coalition forces, the U.S. soldier, UK, Australia, and Canadian, all these people, these soldiers paid with their lives. And, when the war was done, everything went quiet. So I wanted to tell people like what really happened out there, who paid the ultimate sacrifice, and let's not forget these fallen soldiers.
No, absolutely, and that really comes through in the book as well. What I think what I also like is that you say things in the book that many of those of us who've been to Afghanistan feel and have thought about, but never felt vindicated to say. Whereas I think coming from someone like you, who is an Afghan, who's seen it all and has really gotten to understand the war deeply from within, I think you can say certain things, and also they carry a lot of meaning when you say it. And some of those things I want to touch on as we go through. But perhaps it's also right to start with a little bit about your own background before the war. So because you grew up in Afghanistan, right?
Yes, I grew up in Afghanistan.
And during the years of the Taliban, so 96 to 2001, I suspect I think you write in the book you were born in 1988. So you were a child going into a teenager. So from kind of the 8 to 14 or something under the Taliban regime. What was that like? How did they enforce their laws, and how did that set things in motion for you as a child, or your orientation towards the Taliban regime in the first place?
So I was, of course, born in Afghanistan, and I'm in my mid-30s. So this one thing, I'm sure you have also seen it when you were on deployments. Afghans are not really good with their date of births because we never celebrated our birthdays. We never got the chance. We were in war zones. People were so, tensioned and focused on how to make some money to, kind of survive the situation. So at the beginning, man, it was kind of like you're kind of blind, right? You're a kid, you don't understand, you don't know politics, you don't know what good is, what bad is, what reality is, what, all that stuff. You can't really kind of make the judgment like, this is right, this is wrong, or these people are right, these people are bad. And so at the beginning, it was fine. We were living in a village. Of course, no education, nothing. But education is a light. I call education a light, a big torch with a big light on it that comes into your life and, brighten your path that you, as long, the path that you take in, it brightens up a little for you so you don't make the wrong moves. We didn't have education. I didn't know anything. And so in the morning, I would wake up very, very early morning, just, go help with the family, with the, farming stuff, with the sheeps, with the goats going up the mountains. And then, living this village life, coming to the Kabul city during the Taliban regime. I didn't know who these Talibans were. Like, are they good people? Are they bad people? What their intentions are? Are they good for us? Should we be happy with them? Should we not be happy with them? We did not have access to technology, like no TVs, no phones, nothing. So you living in this. There's a new series on, I don't know, it's on Netflix or something. It's called Silo. They keep people in this in this place, kind of. They don't have access to anything outside. They don't know, there's nature out there. They don't know there are people out there. We were living in the same thing as the silo thing. If we wanted to raise our voice, Taliban would shut us down. If we wanted to say something, we would get, beaten up. So, as a young man, as a young kid, you get scared. Like, they're gonna beat you. You don't know, they don't have a good justice system. They don't obey, not the Islamic law. They don't obey the, human rights law. You don't know what they respect. So you're always afraid. Like, if I say this one bad word, is this going to get me killed? So, the Taliban regime was pretty oppressed, pretty, you couldn't even have fun as a kid. That's how bad it was.
So, I find that interesting, especially this idea that you're in a silo. That kind of makes sense in many ways, and also perhaps explains why for some youth, young men, the decision to join the Taliban was a pragmatic one. It was basically because that's all they knew, or those were the people in charge. Those were the people that could, they could earn money with and make money for their families, etc. But of course, there was the other side, and certainly post 2001, when the coalition forces came in, there was another avenue. And as we talk about in a minute, you went down the path of going to work for the coalition forces. But what was, in your mind, what was the reason? I mean, I'm sure you could have gone down the Taliban path, just like many children or many kids of your age at the time might have gone and did do, in fact, right? And oftentimes those were good kids, right? As in growing up in an environment that allowed that, where they saw the Taliban as a solution to a particular problem, i.e., getting money or supporting their family. So, can you talk about that distinction? Why some went one way and others went the other way?
So this come to this point. As I mentioned at the beginning, education. I was lucky. My dad was a former colonel in the previous regimes. He was an educated guy. My grandfather was back then he was a commander in the Afghan army, and my uncle was a tank driver. So my whole family was in the service back in the day. So in the past, we also had these problems with the the government against the other groups that they want to fight or throw out the government. Even before the Russians, we always had these problems. And so my dad, he always educated us in the house. We as Muslims, we pray 5 times a day. And after the evening prayer, my dad would sit down with us and would tell us some stories, like, kind of enlighten us with some experience from his life, from his side of the, things that he went through. And these things made, give me this decision of like, these are not the right people to join. And the government is the right people to join. Even in those times I was young, it was very hard to understand these things. You kind of go on like very blind-sided. And but these my family and my other relatives put an impact on me, to always be a supportive to the government, no matter what. we support the government. Because back in the day, when the Russians were in Afghanistan, we had this group called Mujahideen, which people know them as Northern Alliance. Taliban were a member of the Northern Alliance, and then of course when they left, civil war happened, and then new group came up as the name of the Taliban. So my father fought the Mujahideen, not as a Russian guy, but same thing as NATO is in Afghanistan as a member of the Afghan army. So these things put an impact. And my older brother, he was already working with the coalition forces as a terp or interpreter. So the stories, of course, put an impact in my life that, I should join this side.
Right. I think that's an important point to make, and that oftentimes it is circumstantial, because one of the things that I found, certainly in my experience, and I think, be happy to hear what your thoughts on it, but many people kind of in the West certainly drew a very black and white line between the good guys and the bad guys, i.e. the Taliban, and anybody that's shooting at us is Taliban, and those that aren't shooting, they're the good guys, and that's not often the case. It's often merely circumstances. In your case, you had your father and your relatives and your brother influencing your path, whereas for some other boys your age at the same time, they had a father and an uncle who perhaps supported the Taliban, and they saw that as the right way forward. In other words, everybody thought that they're the good guy, and unfortunately, as one grows up, it's only later in life that one realizes, hold on a minute, what I do actually matters, and what principles and values I uphold matters. But it's not necessarily as clean cut as good and bad guys as people have often portrayed it. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Oh yeah, exactly. The problem with the West is, as you mentioned, they have this line of black and white, right? You are either bad, you're either good. There's no in between. And of course, a lot of people were living in these villages, and not everybody was part of the Taliban. Not everybody wanted to be a Talib. Not everybody wanted to fight with the Taliban. But when during the day you're out there as the government forces, Taliban are not there. So people support you. But as soon as you leave that village, Taliban comes back at nighttime. And when they come back, they have, they are very, very cruel. They don't have any mercy. They will kill you if you don't listen to them. There are like a ton of thousands of stories that I have, hundreds of stories that I personally experienced throughout these years when I investigated or did some questioning when we raided some suspicious compounds. And people told us these stories. So Taliban comes into your home. You're a regular civilian. You're a farmer. You don't want to be part of the government. You don't want to be part of these people. You just want to be a civilian guy doing your farming thing.
You just want to live in peace. Yeah.
Exactly. And they come in and tell you can't even survive yourself with your family. But they come and tell you, cook us food for 20 fighters. You're holy fighters, and you have to feed us. And you are like, I don't have anything. They're like, okay, do whatever you want to do. Provide us the food. We are the holy fighters. We came from God. We are doing God's work here, and you have to feed us. If you don't, we either gonna beat you or we're gonna kill you. And they kind of give you no option. So that's a thing. Sometimes I talk about it on my social media platforms, that do not judge people based on one bad guy or five bad guys. It's like a jungle. You got lions, you got deers, you got crocodiles, you got everything. You can't really say because there's a lion there that the whole jungle is about, or if there's some birds there, the whole jungle is good. You might go to the jungle and a snake bites you and you're dead. So that's the thing that you cannot really judge. Like right now, personally, me, I don't really judge this Russian and Ukraine war as to other people are judging it, because I've been in the war. I know those Ukrainian civilians don't want to be in that war. I know those Russian soldiers don't want to be in that war. But the leadership forces them. From that side, they're like, you have to defend your homeland, defend Ukraine. The other side, Putin is like, oh, you have to go fight, otherwise, you will be put in prison or maybe get executed. So people don't really understand how hard for those civilians it is. Like Ukraine want to be living in peace, or the Russians want to live in peace. So it was the same thing for a lot of the Afghan villagers. So, but that was one of the problems that I always had. Interactions with the coalition forces when I was working as a Terp, like, do not judge the whole village do not look at them as they're all Taliban. They all look the same exactly, of course, because there's a village, they all look the same tradition, everybody's have beard, they all look dirty and dusty because they work in the farms with the dirts and stuff. But you cannot say because one guy in that village is bad, the whole village is bad. So, but this was something very hard in my position at the beginning to convince the coalition members, like, do not judge them by this. But it was very hard because sometimes they would get suspicious, like, why you are defending these people? You're like, So it was a bit harder back then. Yeah.
That's interesting. I mean, I actually did have a kind of a sub question on that point. When I was taking my notes, because that does resonate throughout your words, and perhaps we'll come back to this, because to lead into it, I want to get to how you became an interpreter or a Terp, because it wasn't as the war, or as the US or the Taliban regime fell in 2001. It was sometime after that, and I think, as you mentioned, it was your brother that was the interpreter first. So how did you become an interpreter, and what was that like?
So this one thing that I'm always about this one thing, and nothing can change it, right? If we all work hard to have something on the table so we survive, sometimes that there brings more income, and then we have better stuff in our lives. But back then for us was just bring some food on the table, because the system is very, very different in the Middle East. If you own a house, there is no property tax, there is no government, nothing. So you own the house, that's it. Nobody's gonna say anything. Nobody's gonna charge you. Versus it's very different, like on the west side. Then so the only concern you have left, you have free water, because you use fresh water sources like water wells, and so that's free. Your house is free if you own it. Then the only thing left is the food on the table. If you have good food, then you're living a happy life. For us, that was the case. Personally, for me, if you give me good food, of course, not you be the bad guy, but if you're a good guy, if you give me food, man, take me to front lines. I don't care. Take me to wherever you want to go. I have mentioned this too in all of the interviews I had back in the day when I was becoming Terp. They were like, which base do you want to go to? They would test you, like, how much courage do you have? Are you really willing to fight? Because sometimes they would select guys to be working for the special operation. So that was the case. My brother would tell me, he would come home during his R&R or leave. He was like, man, these defects are pretty good. You could get ice cream during winter time. You could get you could get the watermelon in winter time. You're like, shit, how's that gonna work? Because we didn't have that good of a system back in Afghanistan.
Course,
everything was seasonal. Like, you have this fruits in this season, but here it's different. So that was one of the motivation I had. Let's say maybe 50 or 40% of the motivation to become a Terp was this. And the other motivation was, the money was better. And the job was something that it's military, and I always liked actions and stuff, and I want to always to be part of action thing. I was young, blood's being boiling. You want to be like this badass tough kid, like, oh shit, I've done this, I did this. So these two things were the motivation for me, to become a Terp. And the journey was but to be honest, a little different. Back then, everybody was studying English in the Kabul city, especially Kabul city. Like back then, maybe we might have had like 6-7 million people living in the city, and everybody was studying English. The only reason for these people studying English was to get a job with the English. either work for the NATO or work for ISAF, for the embassies, like, U.S. Embassy, UK Embassy, all these places, English would work for you, and you would make maybe 2 or 3 times than, regular people. So, the money thing was definitely the motivation. And then, yeah, exactly. You go through these courses and you find places. It was pretty famous back then, especially, Camp Phoenix, which was an old Russian transport station. They called it Avsutar, something like that. I think it's a Russian abbreviation, but it was Camp Phoenix in Kabul. Everybody knew that they hire interpreters in Camp Phoenix. If you go to Kandahar, the CAF Kandahar airfield, Bagram airfield, Camp Phoenix in Kabul, Jalalabad airfield, Camp Chapman, these were the main places that the people knew that if you walk to the gate, you might be able to get a job as a terp or as a labor, as a security or something in that base.
And how did you then start? I mean, we'll save a lot of the details for the book, I guess, because there's a lot of detail, and I don't want to spoil the book for anyone, because you do write a lot about how you actually became a terp. But what was that kind of initial experience like, and what were some of the first jobs that you went on?
Oh, okay. So, first thing I started was at the beginning, my English, still my English is not good, but at the begining was
come on, man, it's excellent. You just wrote a book in English, mate. Come on.
At the beginning, my English was more of like, you have these Russian guys speaking in these movies, similar to that. So I didn't have a good understanding. So I started my job when, with this company, and when they looked at my English, they're like, well, okay, let's assign them with the Canadians. And because Canadians were paying the kind of minimum compared to other NATO forces, and then they needed the Terps back in the day. Like, not a lot of people wanted to work with the Canadians. I don't know for what reasons. But so I started with the company. They assigned me with this team. I did not know till, I arrived at the base. I did not know the uniform. I did not know who these people are. So they told me, like, be ready tomorrow early morning. They're going to pick you up and they're going to drop you up at this base. They picked me up, and, this convoy was ready. We hit the base and we arrived. I'm looking around. I see this the U.S. Marine type of pattern on their uniforms. I'm like, are they these U.S. soldiers or who they are? And I saw a Canadian flag, and I was like, oh, they're Canadian. So, I started with the Canadian, and the first job was with the Special Forces, with the Joint Task Force 2. I did not know what the difference between the special operation and a conventional or regular unit is back then. To my eyes, they were all soldiers, but there were stories like these scary stories about the Special Forces. Oh, these people are like, when they're born, they take them away from their mothers, they feed them snakes, and all that stuff. They were, of course,
like, the myths, myths that surround. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh, they're not even built like human. They're like machines. Especially with the given as example of the Terminator, Arnold, the movie. They're like, special forces. So it kind of got me a little scared at the beginning. I was like, man, I don't know what these guys gonna do. Are they gonna just run into the village and start shooting all over the place? Because I have never shot a gun, and I did not have experience as a proper handling a gun before that. So I started with them, and we went out on this operation. I played it cool. I didn't give them this feedback of like, okay, I'm scared. That's my first ever time, stepping feet in this kind of environment. And Kandahar and Uruzgan looks exactly the same. Compared to the northern Afghanistan. So we got off this the convoy. We went to the village. I was very scared, and I was listening to Taliban in the scanner. If they were saying, let's shoot them, I would, sometimes they would just mess around and they would just say stuff, but they're not do anything. Sometimes they would do. So if they're saying like, let's shoot them, I went to prone position, being scared like I might get shot at. Or,
just on that scanner, can you just clarify, because some in the audience might not understand what you mean by the scanner, and you listening, because some who haven't experienced that might not necessarily understand it.
Oh, okay, sure. So ICAM scanner is a communication device. It's like in a radio that scans frequencies from other radios if they're not encrypted, and you could listen to them. And you cannot talk to them back. In most scanners, you couldn't talk to them back. At the beginning, they didn't know we were listening to them, but later they knew. So Taliban talking to each other like, hey, as an example, they had different call signs like, hey, Jason, can you hear me? Yeah. I see, they called all the, coalition forces infidel. I see infidels walking in the village. Let's ambush them. Oh, you have the PKM ready. So I'm listening and I'm, passing this information to the captain that I was working with. He was right in front of me. So I was right behind the captain. I was like, oh, this is what they want to do. Oh, they're going to... And my feelings, at the beginning, I didn't know this, but the feeling with them passing the message was very important, because if I was like, they're gonna ambush and it doesn't really sound serious. But if I'm like, oh, they're gonna ambush, they probably have the PKs ready. People get like, oh shit, he's gonna, he's in a panic, not panic, but that scary situation that they
stress,
maybe might get shot at. Yeah, exactly. Stress, the better. So I didn't know if they are serious or they're not. So I was like, oh shit, they're gonna shoot at us. I just went to prone position, and so that the scanner thing was this: like we could listen to them and we could hear them, and we had it. Like we had it from I don't know years, maybe 2005 till end of the 2021. We always use scanners.
Of course. Yeah.
So. Yeah, this was the experience with after this first operation. Man, that fear thing was gone. I don't know what happened. That fear was gone. I don't know if I was very young, being maybe, but elegant, not caring about anything. Next operation, I was like, walking, not really. If I see something like. Bad's gonna happen hear something bad's gonna happen in the scanner, I would take it serious but not be scared. So that fear was gone. I was happy, but I don't know what tricked it, but the fear was gone at the second operation.
And you spend a lot of time in the book, or you mention it quite a few times, about your life as an interpreter and how misunderstood your life as an interpreter, not just yours, but the life of the interpreters, how misunderstood it was by many who they worked for, whether it be the civilian contracting companies that employed them, or the coalition forces that they worked with. What are some of those things that you found that those who you worked for or who employed you didn't really understand about the circumstances of the Terps?
Oh, you asked a very, very good question. When I was writing the book, the close friends I have here in the U.S., we worked together throughout all these years. So most of them are here in the city I'm living. And I told them about the book. They were so excited. And, the first thing everybody mentioned was, are you going to talk about the problems that we were facing? And I was like, oh, yeah, I already have that covered. So this was one of the frustration I had. Look, if me and you fighting a war, we were on the front line, and this is my nature, this is my habit. If you do not trust me, just even a little bit, I have this feeling like I don't want to be with this guy. I don't want to be fighting alongside this guy because you're not trusting me. That was the case in some of the play. I don't know. So just let me be clear. I'm not blaming any soldiers. Soldiers were, of course, obeying or following orders. It was the leadership, man. Fucking generals, the colonels, making up all these decisions on these Terps. Terps were the best asset for a coalition unit out there.
More an essential asset. I mean, there was nothing the coalition force really could have done apart from drop bombs in places without the interpreters, because we had no language skills as the coalition force. There were very few and far between that knew the local context, knew the languages, knew the culture. So it was an absolutely essential part of the war effort.
Exactly. And so this was the problem. I was always trying to do something, to let the team know that what you're doing is not good. It's it's going to have some consequences in the future for us, whether it was culture, whether it was treating the people in the village, especially the topic that we covered, like looking at everybody in the village as bad guy. That wasn't a good sign. So I wanted to tell them like, hey, no, this is different. Look, we cannot look at all of them as bad guy. That's going to put a bad impact in the future when you come, because we were going out in these villages every day. And, if you treat them like they're all bad guys, Afghans are pretty bad at taking revenge. Like they take hate very personal. If you treat them nice, they're like, oh, they always remember that you treat them nice. And if 10 years pass, they try to pay that back to you. But if you treat them badly, they take that very deep into their hearts. Like, okay, I have not done anything to this guy. Why he's treating me this bad? You came to my country, you're treating me like I'm the bad guy, which I'm not. So this was very hard for me as a Terp to convince the unit that I was working with, like, hey, this is not a good behavior. Let's not do this culturally. This is not right. Just trying to avoid problems in the future. But this one, among all these problems, this one of the worst one that bothered me a lot. We are going out on the operation 6 months in a row. I mean, we were going out every other day in 2 days, maybe 2 times a week, 3 times a week. And when I'm with the team, we had 4 Terps that were working with this team I was working with. And one operation, they would take 2, the other operation take 2, sometimes they would take 4 of us. When I was going out in these operations, I never get ambushed when I was working with the Canadians. I got lucky, I look at it as a blessing from God, as I look at it as a blessing, from my prayers or support from my parents. But these soldiers came to me, that hurt me a lot back then. They told me, are you working with the Taliban? And I said, what did he? They're like, when you're with us in the operation, nothing's happening. But when you're not in the operation, we get ambushed. And I'm like, it's my first time ever in this part of the country. I don't even know these people. I don't know. I mean, this question bothered me so much, to be honest. Like, they didn't came as a joke that I would say like, oh, maybe they're joking, they're just being funny or sarcastic, but they were serious. They're like, man, when you're not with us in the operations, we get ambushed. And I'm like, I don't know, man. I didn't have access to my phone even back then. I don't know who these guys are. I never been in these villages. So, and I won't be stupid to pass information to the Taliban while living inside a military base. Phones are being scanned, conversations being sometimes listened to. And do I look that stupid that I give away information to get my friends killed? Like, if I don't care about you, these 2 Afghans that are going out with you, they're like my friends. They're my very, very good friends. If it wasn't, let's say, I didn't care about you because you're not an Afghan, I would care about them. I know as a human being, as a Muslim, if I do something wrong, I will answer to God, especially taking somebody's life. If you take somebody's innocent life, no matter what religion, what they believe in, where they're from, you're responsible. I know this for a fact, that God will hold you responsible. God's going to ask you. This came in our holy books, that did you give that person life and soul that you were there to take it? No. I created you as equal as him. I give you chances, to worship whatever you want. I give him chances. I feed you, I feed him. So you're not in no place to make that decision to take his life if he's innocent. If it's bad, you're in a war, that's a different story. But, so that was one of the things that, that trust issues all the time. They wanted to track our phones all the time. We weren't allowed to call our family members. We were only allowed, once a week. And on that time, they were listening to our conversations. We knew they were listening to our conversations. And so these things were very hard. When I was with the Canadians, they have these 3 regiments. They have the 2 English regiment, and they have the the French regiment, which they call it the Vendée, which is, I think, means 22nd regiment. This French guy, man, they speak French with each other, and me and this Turk, we were speaking, in our language, in the Dari and Pashto. And this French soldier came to me. He goes like, "Why you guys are not speaking in English?" He was what he meant was like, "I'm concerned at what you guys planning to do." And I told him like, "Why you guys are not speaking in English? You guys are speaking in French. I don't understand what you're planning to do." And then he was a very dumbass soldier, to be honest, like, coming up with this kind of question, like, why not speak in English? Like, what do you expect us to speak English? So these were like very, very simple steps in this process. There were a lot of trust issues that, I mainly covered it in the book. With one saying with one word by mistake, you would go through a 6-hour counterintelligence or CIA investigation. You would go through polygraph because you said a wrong word and you didn't know, because in the courses, in English courses, we learned the source, the word source for the source was, they told us it means a spy. A spy means, of course, a spy, right? Guy operating in another country. But the meaning was source. In our language, the meaning was source. Source also has the same meaning, but a spy has a different jurisdiction, working in different, very, very different environment or different procedures, and a source is a very different. But when it comes to our language, the meaning was the same as source. And when we were translating, and we were telling the soldiers like, they have not seen any Taliban spy around here, man, they took us very serious for that word. They like, how do you know the word spy? We were like, this means source. We didn't know the word source back then. This means source. And they're like,
I can totally see, I can hear the frustration in your voice, and I can see how these situations can unfold. Because as you rightly pointed out at the start, we from the West have a tendency to see things as black and white. And of course, when you're in these environments, when you are in an uncertain environment, when you don't understand what's happening around you, you start making assumptions. It's very easy to see, ghosts everywhere you look, and bad intentions everywhere you look. So in a way, and I'm sure you do, and as you said, it's not the soldier's fault, it's the leadership, etc. I'm sure you can empathize with those soldiers on the ground who don't know you, don't know the Afghan culture, don't know anything about what's happening. The enemy looks the same as, the average farmer. Everything is a question mark. Everything is new. The terrain is vastly different to what most of them have seen in the first place. So there's a natural tendency to divide between us and them, because if you're a local Afghan, well, you're part of them, and therefore you're a risk, and therefore, and of course we've all heard the stories of, the sleepers inside a base, turning on the friendly forces, etc. So this seed of doubt has been well and truly, planted, and of course Taliban or any of the insurgents use these narratives, right? Promulgated these stories. So but I can just imagine how hard that would be for you, who's risking your life day in, day out to, I guess, help the cause, but then to not be, trusted to even have your phone, which, when you're far away from your family, far away from from the people that you know and care about, especially in an Afghan context, right? Which is a very, very social kind of collective type of culture, right? Where speaking to your family and your friends is part, it's essential.
Exactly.
It's part of what it, what being Afghan is. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was but back then, to be honest, I mentioned it in the book just to give people a picture of like what the story was back then. But back then, I totally understood these people, and I always kind of made jokes and funs. I always tried to stay funny, joke around with people, have a happy time, and I totally understood them back then. Like, like I told these soldiers, I saw the frustration in some of the soldier faces when I talked to them, and they knew me. We spent 6 months together, we spent 8 months together, and we spent times out in the field together. We talked about each other, we share cultures. These soldiers knew me. Like just one time, we took a team photo. And then, I did not have access to cameras or phones, anything. So I asked one of the team guys, I was like, hey man, can I have, this picture? Just, back then, I wasn't using Facebook or stuff like that. So can I have this photo, just a memory? And he was like, well, let me go talk to the commander. I'll be back. Then he went and then talked to, they called, in the U.S., they call a team sergeant for the special operation. They had warrant officers. So he went and talked to the warrant officer, and then he came back. He told me, I saw the sadness in his eyes, and he's like, hey, I'm sorry, bro. He told me, he said, I'm honest with you. I don't want to hide anything from you. But he told me, do not give him the picture. And so this all came down, as I said, to the leadership, and then from this the team leadership, it goes to the HQ leadership, and from the HQ leadership, where this problem started from the Afghans that they recruited as cultural advisors in the West, either in U.S. or mainly they were all in U.S. These were the Afghans that they were born in the U.S. They were never been to Afghanistan. They heard the stories from their parents, but they never been to Afghanistan. They're like, American Afghans, not really Afghan Americans, because they were, these stories, they are like, oh, do not trust these locals. I always had conversation or arguments with we called them Cat 2 or Cat 3, they had clearance and
security
stuff.
clearances,
Exactly. So I always had this conversation with them. I was like, why you tell these Americans, like, do not trust the locals, especially the Terps? Like, why are you feeding them this? Because the US soldiers had this cultural training before deployments, and then these Afghans would go to these military camps. They would tell them, sometimes, I'm just frankly honest with you, they're all still my Afghans, but honesty is a different thing. For them to keep this job and for them to keep coming to this base during these rotations, because the pay was a little bit better compared to other jobs, they were laughing about some stuff. They were making up stories of like, oh, these locals are like this. That's why these coalition, when they come to Afghanistan, they had this mindset of like, okay, this is what I heard from the other Afghans in the U.S. And they are looking at you with these, doubts and suspicions and all that stuff. So it always came from the Afghans that were born outside Afghanistan, and this information were fed into the soldiers. The soldier came in with this information, and with that, you mentioned, I think they called it back then green on blue or blue on green thing. But these were the things that I understood the soldier, and I was like, but I understood them. That's why I didn't want to argue, because I knew they were told stuff and they're just following the orders.
Yeah, it's a really tough one. I mean, I can totally see how the dynamic could be really or can be really affected by this absence of trust, right? Because it's so difficult to build trust when one side trusts completely and the other side is completely reserved and sees you as outside of the in-group. But from the, if you're talking about the photo from the Special Forces soldiers, again, I can empathize from their perspective. They all have protected identities. They're very careful about, and this as a Special Forces operator yourself, how much you have to be careful about protecting your identity, not because of yourself necessarily, but because of your families, because those who might want to do you harm, they might not be able to target you, but they might be able to target your family, and if your face is out there, etc., etc. So there's all these security imperatives. Oftentimes they're blown out of proportion, but one act, one person dying, one family paying the price is enough to cause for this to become such a huge sensitivity so that it's enforced across the entire force, which doesn't, of course, help your situation, which is the really tragic part. One of the things that you did talk about in there is that you as Terps didn't get the same medical treatment as the soldiers you were supporting. Was that the case with all the militaries you worked with? Was that kind of the status quo?
Oh yeah, exactly. So, you have different injuries, right? When you're out in the in the field, sometimes it's just something we can recover in maybe a couple of days or a week, and some injuries like losing a leg, losing a hand, or losing you becoming a disabled, right? That was one of the things that we always had problems with it. First thing, we never had insurance. Like if you lose this, the insurance will help you just to kind of survive out there, not being able to do this job. You're probably not going to be able to do any job out there, especially with the Afghanistan situation. You don't have disability benefits. Nobody's going to pay you disability. There are going to be a lot of problems. So insurance was one of the problems because from the other side, we were hearing stories like the coalition forces are paying these contracting companies insurance money to support these Terps if they get killed in action or if they get wounded in action. But this very very good scenario that I'm gonna give you is it happened back in, I think it was 2009 or 10. It happened in Kandahar. An ODA team got ambushed, and one of the soldiers, unfortunately, stepped on an IED, and he had a Terp right behind them. So the blast killed the Terp and killed the soldier. And so what they did was, of course, they take the U.S. soldier to the, through their process. And then for the Afghan Terp, this is what they did. I mean, the other Terp that was in that operation was a very good friend of mine, and we worked together for almost 2 years in different places. And so what happened, they took this Afghan's dead body, they took it to Kandahar, to CAF, or Kandahar Airfield, where the main HQ was. And then they called the company and told them, like, oh, there's a dead Terp here, or he was killed in action, or KIA Terp. Come take the body and hand it over to his family for proper burial and all that funeral stuff. So the company comes in and you take the body, and because of all the Terps were using call signs that nobody was using as a real name back then, so everybody had a call sign for security reason. It was easier to pronounce the Western name. So this guy, his call sign, I mean, this guy who's dead, they put the picture and the calls, I mean, the information of the other Terp who was alive still back in the base. And when they give him the information, this was the information, and because his face was a little messed up, and the company didn't know you individually, so they're like, oh, that's him, this is this guy. They print out your information, and then so they take the body to Kabul. They call the family member of this other Terp who's still alive, but he does not have a phone because of restriction and all that stuff to call family, check on them. So the family is called, and so when the family is called, this also happened. The guys from the company are hiding in the airport, and over the phone they tell them, like, oh, the body is in this part of the airport, go take over the custody of the body. They don't even properly hand over your loved one that was killed in action. So they take the body home. This kid, he didn't have any brothers. He had like 2 young sisters. He wasn't really social like the other Afghans. Like a lot of families didn't know him. So they take the body home and all that stuff. And the process start for the funeral and the burial. And this is all culture. Father and mom at the end comes in and say their goodbyes to their loved one before they take him to the cemetery to bury the dead person. And so the father comes in, and then the father sees the dead body. So it's the deads are wrapped in the coffin. And so he opens his face and he sees a different person. He goes like, "Oh, this is not my son." And this is the frustrating part. everybody's like, oh, uncle, we understand. It's hard for you to believe it, but this was God's will. This happened. He goes like, he's not my son. He doesn't look like he's not my son. Yeah, and everybody's like quiet. That panic situation. You're like stressed out. Like, I can't express harder. Like, he's not my son. And everybody's quiet. Like, oh, they're feeling like, oh, I'm sorry. It's hard for him. He can comprehend or understand it. Yeah, and so then he blasts. He goes like, "Motherfuckers!" I'm sorry for cursing.
No, that's fine.
He's like, "Motherfuckers! He's not my son." People are like, let's call the mom, see what's going on. So the mom comes into the room. The mom looks at the dead body, and he's like, he's not my son. I don't know who that guy is. So at this time, while this is happening, the team found out that the company has given the wrong information to the family. They took the wrong body to the wrong place, and so they give back then the phones weren't working most of the places, so they give the iridium or the satellite phone to call your family member something bad happened. So he calls his family. When you call from satellite phones, the number comes in as 001 and then a kind of American number. So the father looks at his phone. This is a story from the son's side when he talked to his father. He goes like, who's this at this time? So, he calls them again. He picks up. He goes like, who is this? He was like, hey, Dad, this is me. His call sign, back then was different, but let's say John. Hey, Dad, I'm John. He goes like, John who? My son? He goes like, yeah, Dad, this is me, John. And the father goes like, where are you? He goes, oh, I'm in northern Afghanistan working in a civilian company. He goes like, motherfucker, who's the body then in my house that they told me your son was killed working? So this Terp did not even tell his family that he was going to work with the coalition forces.
Oh, wow.
So, these are like, the problems.
This is reality for the Terp. Yeah.
Exactly. And this is the side of the family that the son is still alive. Imagine this other side of the family. So this body was going to Oregon province. You've been to, Afghanistan. Oregon is not a place that you want to bring a body that he was killed in action while working with the Americans. So they had to take the body to Oregon, and man, there was so much mess. People were, the Taliban weren't letting the family to bury this guy's body in the cemetery because he was working with the coalition. And, these things happen quite a lot. So Terps lost their, legs. Company never cared about it. Even with this Terp, when he went on leave, take care of his family. So somehow he got the permission from his parents. He came back to base. They did not let him inside the Terps base in Kaf or Kandahar airfield because the company was worried that if this Terp comes inside the base, he's going to tell this story to other Terps and other Terps will be scared and people will start resigning. So they kicked him out of the base, and luckily somehow an ODA guy that he knew, he saw him on the road. He goes like, "Hey, what you doing here?" You tell him the story. He take him inside inside CAF where Camp Brown, the Special Forces base was, and the story was resolved. Then later he came and worked with us when I was working with the SEALs, and this was just one story. There are like many stories like this.
I can imagine. I can imagine. And just to double click on one particular point. What that I think is important for us to remember. When you get hit by an IED or something, and you might get the same treatment as the American or Australian or Canadian soldiers there on the spot, right? You'll be treated medically in the first instance, probably much like every other soldier that was there. But I think what the point you're really making is afterwards. So if you were injured, if you lost an arm, if you lost a leg, or had this is where I want to come to your injuries as well through one of your blasts. If you had any kind of concussions or brain injury or anything like that, none of that was. That's it. You obviously couldn't work as an interpreter anymore, but you were thrown back onto the road. And of course, if you had lost a limb, then you couldn't really work on the farm anymore. It became a lot harder. So this is another area of that particular employment that we rarely saw because we dealt with these civilian companies. And when I say we, I mean the coalition forces. We dealt with these civilian companies who were employing interpreters, and oftentimes, were making ridiculous profits, but paying the Terps, relatively low wages, maybe high comparative to the average Afghan, but certainly low in the kind of Western context. But the profits they were making, of course, they were just incredible amounts. But as you say, no insurance. No. Once the Terp is being gone through the meat grinder, they're out on the other side. That's someone else's problem. So it's I really do. I just wanted to kind of capture that point again, because I think that's not something we as the ultimate users of that particular service, i.e. the interpretation service, we don't necessarily always think about, the second and third order effects of the work that you guys did at the time.
Oh, yeah, exactly. So, these were the things, like, as soon as you get discharged from, the coalition hospital, eventually they have to discharge you, right? So, but in reality, you have to come back for, future treatment. You have to come for either physical therapy, depends on your injury. But that's it. You only get that one chance when they take you off the field, they take you to the hospital. When they take care of you, then, because the soldiers getting wounded in action, or unfortunately getting killed in action, back then, quite almost maybe every week or every few days, so they didn't have a big space for the people to keep them. So once you lost that that access to the hospital, that's it. Then you had to go pay from your own pocket, and of course the medical system wasn't good in Kabul city. And if you lose a leg, that's it. You get those old Russian time legs that they kind of not really useful at all. So that was a little different. And the company, it's all the company, and nobody was following up from it. Of course, all this conversation, as I always mentioned, even in my book, goes to the leadership, not the soldiers that we were working. It goes to the generals, the top commanders that they are involved in this type of contracts. And we always complained. We complained to the colonels that they were coming, to the generals that they were coming, and even our captains, team commanders were complaining, this is how they treat our Terps. This is how much they pay our Terps, and this is how much we're paying the company. And but it was never kind of resolved. No,
I mean, I can I have some of my own memories of some of those discussions. You were blown up as well, and I just want to touch on that as well. As a Terp, because from there, I think your career shifted, or your did you tell us the story first of how you were blown up, and then I want to ask us some follow-up questions on that.
So I was in kind of beginning of maybe a few months, and when I was working with the Canadians, and then we were going on the supply mission, and we supplied this small base. It was close to Panjwai, which is a district in Kandahar. It was pretty bad, war zone, front line kind of thing. And then on the way back, you're driving, and then we hit this IED. First experience, never had this experience, never seen the videos of, if you get blown up, what the feelings are, so we got blown up. And, I'm in the shock kind of situation, because I'm just, a young kid, the regular civilian kid who never had these trainings. If this situation happened, what should you do? What should you not do? And then, so we had these trucks. The Canadians had it. They called them LAV or LAV. Americans, I think, call it a striker. So they had this back door ramp. So, we drive a little further from the explosion site. And then, the ramp went down. We had two EUD guys, very, very young kid. I still remember their faces, very young kid. And I was like, I always told one of them, you're very handsome. I don't know how many girls you can get with that face. May his soul rest in peace. So he walked off with his body, and then the captain also got off. I was in the truck that the captain was in. So these three people got off, And then, the EUD went to do the kind of this spot, see what happened, because everybody was fine. We just had this shock, I banged my head, man, it was just a shock moment, nothing, no blood, no injuries, nothing obvious. And so I am watching these two EOD guys working on that ditch where the ditch was created by the explosion or by the blast, and then goes boom, the secondary goes off. Man, this was a scene that always comes just, flash right in front of my eyes, which it just did in this moment. One of the EOD guys that, the handsome kid, his head was blown off his body. And for you as a young kid, as a civilian, never seen this kind of stuff, seeing somebody die in that kind of situation, it gives you a pretty bad, kind of PTSD, whatever you want to call it, or pretty bad shock. And I've seen bad things, but not in that level. And so the captain, his jaw was hanging. His face was damage all over. The two EUD instantly were KIA, and so that gave me a very I was quiet for almost 40 minutes. I did not say a word. I could not say a word. Nothing was coming into my head. That was just it's like you're dying, and they say these memories come in front of you. This was the situation. I was like, are we gonna die? So, helicopters, cashback not cashback, but medevac were called in and took the bodies. And then we start driving back to base. Every road, you've been to Afghanistan, there are a lot of road bombs in the places. We first road bomb, the bump that, they have these road bombs all in the cities. We had this ditch, or maybe it was a road bump that, the truck hit. First thing I did was jumped and cover my head. I thought we had another IED. So the PTSD started right away there for me. I had this feeling, this fear. I never had that fear before. I was in operations and all that stuff, but never had that fear of just driving on a paved road. So the fear started. If the truck would brake hard, I would jump like, is there another explosion? We got back to base, and things were smooth. They told me, "Are you fine?" Yes, I'm fine, and I wasn't medically checked up. They back then maybe they could have sent me to CAF, talk to some professional doctors, because those are small bases. You just get medics, not doctors. So are you fine? Yeah, no injuries, no nothing, and so, things went along. I still had those. Back then I had those memories a lot when we were going out in the vehicles. I would always rather walk instead of driving because of, I was terrified of the fear of not getting blown up. And then probably was 3 months later, we were playing cards with these soldiers. We were playing, I don't know what sort of card game was it. Then I'm playing, and then I go boom. I black out. Brain seizure happened. Brain seizure happened. I did not know what it is. I did not feel it. I could not understand it. I didn't know anything. I was like, with my soul, it wasn't dream. It was nothing. Like, you're gone. Your body is gone. Your soul is gone. You don't feel anything. Even if I was getting slapped in my face, I couldn't feel it in that moment. So the soldier told me, and I would get that mean, scary face when the seizure pops in my head. And I never seen myself, but soldiers told me you get pretty mean face. And the soldier's like, "Hey, are you okay?" And I'm quiet, like I don't hear, I don't anything, but I don't see. And then he shake me, and I was like, "Hey, what's up? What's going on?" He goes like, "Are you okay? You look pretty mean, and you look kind of, I don't know, you don't look as usual." As like, I don't know. I'm fine. I did not know, this thing happened to me. I do have a brain seizure now. I do have, this PTSD caused me to have this brain seizure, and my brain's going to be stopping time to time, sometimes, especially under stress, maybe 10 times. It happened a lot. Sometimes, like in 2 hours, I would get 15 brain seizures. Wow. And then, it was pretty bad. Sometimes it would stress me so much that's why I always wanted to, laugh and be funny. I don't want to give a stress into my head. So, this stayed with me, and I have to. So this is the most messed up part for me. I had to keep a secret because I was worried if I tell anybody, I might lose my job. If I tell anybody this happened, they might like, he's not in a good medical condition. Let's, send them home. So I had to keep it a secret. Often happening during operations. During the firefights, it never happened. It always happened when I was quiet and thinking. And then when it was happening, the guys were like, "Are you okay?" I was like, "Oh yeah, I think I saw something scary in that corner." I was just making up stories, just cover stories. And, it was pretty bad. It happened because of my job, but I had to keep it a secret not to lose the job.
And I mean, it's crazy to put it mildly. But how did that? And you said you continued for a while, and I'm guessing do you still get these seizures now? Is that still something that you experience?
Oh yeah. So it was with me for for a very long time. It's still with me, but in Afghanistan I couldn't get the proper medication for it. Like this one time, it was years later, like 2016, maybe 17. They took me to a hospital inside the Kaya, which was they called it the French hospital. They had proper doctors and everything in Kabul city. Back then I was working with the SASR, and I'm not working, but operating alongside as an Afghan SF. They took me, they saw me, they're like, "Oh, let's get you checked," and then they got me an appointment. We went in there, and this is the funny part. The French doctor, I don't blame her. In a way. So she's like, what's your problem? Like, what happens to you? What's your illness? And I said, like, this happens to me, this. I couldn't explain it. I didn't know it's called brain seizure. I was like, I call it blackout. I just black out and, I don't feel anything. So it was, seizure. I explained this whole seizure to her, and she goes like, when does it happen? I'm like, oh, when I'm sad or when I'm stressed, or when I'm angry. And she goes like, oh, try to stay happy. And this is what I said. This is what I said. I said, does it look like I'm not trying to be fucking happy? I'm trying to be fucking happy, but stress is a part of the life. It happens to you. And she apologized right away. She goes like, I'm so sorry. We don't have that level of doctors here that can help you with this. I don't know. Maybe they had, because brain seizure, when I came to US, I found that it's a common thing. Neurologists or their expertise field on this thing. But because probably they had a lot of soldier, maybe with the same situation, maybe she was thinking it's just regular PTSD, just flashbacks, nothing maybe that serious. And I could not drive. I did not ever drive. I got my license last year on December. I bought my first ever car last year. I drove without license in the field during the operations, just on emergency situations. But my crew were scared of, while I was driving, they were always scared. They're like, shit, if it goes blackout, maybe, we just hit a wall or something. But I bought my first car like last year, got my first license last year. And thanks God, before that, I went to some doctors here, and then the doctor told me, the neurology doctor that I go to, he told me, it's not a really big one. It's just something that if you would have taken care of it back then, maybe it was would have been resolved in 2 years, taking medication. But since now it's a long time past on it might stick with you, and you have to just take these medications, till you're alive. So I'm taking these medications. Thanks God, I have not had a seizure maybe for almost a year. Back then I had seizure like one in one day, at least 2-3 seizures would have happened. No questions. And sometimes with the stress, like more seizures, but so far it's good.
And the reason I wanted to find out that question is because of what comes after, right? Because you then joined the Afghan commandos, and after some time, and I'll invite you to tell us about this. You hear about this Task Force 241, a secret unit that you hadn't heard of before. So can you talk us through that? Firstly, how you became an Afghan commando in the kind of wave tops, and then land on Task Force 241 and what that unit was about.
So, Afghan SF teams were new back on that time. There were only 6 Afghan commando battalions in the whole country. And so it was, the top tier Afghan unit. And I wanted to get out of this TERP job, not for any other reason, but just, for that trust issue thing was one of the main cases that I wanted to get out of it, because you cannot change the rules, and these soldiers have to follow up the rules. So for me, the better way is to change path. So this is what I did, and found out through information and stuff, links through all team guys from the U.S. side that they were working as advisors with the Afghan Special Forces. I joined teams, did a lot, of course, long story trainings and all that stuff. And so this happened, and I was part of the Afghan SF, and I was doing that for almost it was over a year. And this is the thing about the Task Force 241. Man, there is no Special Forces unit in Afghanistan, whether Afghan or non-Afghan, that I did not know about. I start from the, CAG, DevGRU, regular SEALs, ODAs, SASR, first, commando or second commando battalion of the Australian. I work with them too. And then the British
some
SAS,
of them might be listening.
that's
interesting, yeah. That's great.
Maybe, yeah. So then I think they call it the one commando or 2 commando, something like that. I'm sorry if I'm first
that's
commando
right.
or second. Yeah. The first one was the reserve, and
that's
the second one was the active one thing.
The regulars, that's right.
Then I knew the bases, I knew where they're operating, and I work with the Norwegian FSK, MJK, the British SAS, SBS. But when Task Force 241 came, the thing about Task Force 241 came to my head through a very old good friend of mine. I was like, who the fuck is Task Force 241? We're the best out here. We're, that thing, the competition between the branches. We're the best out here, the Army Special Forces. Like, who is this Task Force 241? I never heard of them. And my friend goes like, that's the thing about them. You never heard of them. That's how, back then this phrase as the quiet professional was a kind of common thing among the US, like, stay quiet, so you're the quiet professional. And so curiosity started popping in my head. I was like, okay, let's find out more about this Task Force 241. So, there are a lot of details, and then I joined Task Force 241. Man, this joining Task Force 241 was a very, very different experience for me in my whole career. Like, I have never been to a unit this secret. I have been to Task Force 241, not inside the unit, but maybe just, couple of, 100 or 200 meters away into another base. And I even looked at their base, and I thought it's a regular army base. It was very covered. It was a massive base, but it was very covered. I was like, maybe that's part of the ANA or Afghan National Army. Never this question came to my head. There's this, tier 1 unit here. So, I joined the process. I became, I went through the training.
I guess as you write in the book, you were invited, right? Because it was very, somebody had to recommend you. It wasn't, there was no flyers, there was no advertising. You were asked to come somewhere and attend, and it was all again done very kind of secretly.
Oh, exactly. And, even when I came to when I started asking around from other friends that they were in the service, nobody knew about the Task Force 241. They're like, who is Task Force 241? Everybody had this question, like, who these guys are. Most of the guys were, not most, but some of the guys that I mentioned the story, they told me like, it's probably a made up thing. Don't really bother yourself with. But when the selection process started, I was, as I mentioned in the book, I was picked up in a secret spot that never happened to me before. And, cars all tinted. You can't see outside. I was taken to this base. And then it was a massive base. And then we would go inside, do this, interviews and questions and all that stuff. And, so eventually I became part of the Task Force 241. But this was one of the things, the good thing about the 241, it wasn't for public. What I mean with public, it wasn't for everyone. You like other units, like the Afghan Special Forces. If you knew some generals, if you knew some, a strong politician, maybe they could influence your leadership to get you through the selection courses, but through the selection course. But 241 was a totally different thing. You couldn't even come to the gate if you weren't invited or if you weren't told to come to the gate. Like if you would come to the gate, there was no soldier standing outside the gate. The gates were all shut. There was a tower with the tinted windows. A soldier would come, face a mask on the face, would tell you what do you need, and if you give them just wrong information, they tell you just leave the area. If you don't, then you will see a QRF team comes in, put a bag in your head, and take you inside the base for an interrogation for 2-3 days. So it was a very serious thing, being part of the 241. The salary was very, very different. The salary was, I was getting paid maybe like back then. I was getting paid as Afghan 4-star general. More than an Afghan 4-star general. So, but it was a serious thing. And I was always fan of being out there, kicking doors, doing, this stuff. But man, 4-1 was very, very different. They had low-vis operation, they had high-vis operation, covert operation, working outside the border, working inside the country, all over the place. The maximum money I ever paid to a source before that was probably, maybe 100,000 Afghani, which was like, let's say, maybe $1,500. By the way, for Afghanistan, it was a lot of money. But here, I have seen people got paid, and not, of course, regular people, but sources around like $500,000. This money didn't come from, of course, from the Afghan government. That's pretty obvious. This money, this support Afghanistan government couldn't do it. So there's, of course, stronger power behind this task force that whatever you do, nobody can question you. Nobody from the task force 241 ever were kind of prosecuted or taken to a court. But when I was with the Afghan Special Forces, the Army Special Forces, it was very different. Rules of engagement were different. One small mistake could cost your career. Maybe they would put you in prison. But with 241, it was a very, very crazy different experience. Like,
I really want to talk about that, and I want to double click on some of those points because you've brought up a number of interesting points that are really interesting to me. Firstly, I just want to talk about this the $500,000 payment, US dollar. What kind of a source is that that would get $500,000 in cash? And what kind of information would you expect from a source like that?
So this source, that target is gone. I'm not going to mention the target's name, but he was very famous. He was operating close to Kabul city, and there was a $5 million bounty on his head. And so this source, so here's the thing with this source. This source was one of the craziest sources I ever seen. He had 4 passports. When I was sitting and talking to him, we were talking about this operation. He told me right in front, into my face, that, hey, you are among my targets. He told me that right in front. And I said, what do you mean? And I was ready to just, pop off. This guy's just to get rid of him. He goes like, there are people paying money for a member of your task force to be assassinated. Like they pay a lot of money for a member of your task force people. And I was like, so I wanted to make sure if I am specifically, my name is on the list, I have to really do something about it. We knew there are other places. Russians were going after our people from our task force. Iranian were going people our task force. ISIS was going after people from our task force. Chinese were going people our task force. That keeping it very secretive helped everybody with their identity, keeping them secret. So this level of source was, this guy in that level he had 4 passports. He had, of course, obvious the Afghan nationality. He had an Arabic, Emirati. I think it was Jordan or Lebanon. I don't exactly remember, but he had the passport for this. For that country, he had Iranian passport, which is very, very hard to get, and he had Pakistani passport. So this guy could, flew all over these places, not getting caught, and nobody could do. And of course, if he was working for us, he was definitely working for another agency. But, he is like that Wagner guy who pays him the better money. He gives you the better information.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. So what was the purpose of Task Force 241? And, why did it exist? And who commanded Task Force 241?
So Task Force 241, from the information I have, from when I started working there, it was established back in 2001 at the very beginning.
So right at the start.
Right at the start. That was a very small unit. And their job was, from the beginning, it was, so we were mainly under the command of the intelligence, the Afghanistan intelligence directorate, or, they called it NDS.
NDS,
So in theory, we were part of NDS, but in reality, we were part of something way bigger than the NDS. In reality, this was the thing. This unit was created at the beginning for, small covert operation, whether inside Afghanistan or, outside Afghanistan, like in Pakistan, mainly, especially in Quetta, where, the Taliban, they gathering, their leadership, everything was out there. And so in the beginning it was small, and their purpose was to be a counterterrorism unit. And from the beginning, they had the top tier U.S. Units advising this task force. The money was coming in, the money was flowing in non-stop, like money for sources, money for food, money like our salary, everything was just paid in the unit. Like we had almost zero attachment to the government, or almost zero responsibility to answer anything to the government. Like we're getting paid inside the task force. Our supply comes in directly from US. The food is directly being supplied by the money, and not the food itself, but the money to provide this food is supplied by the US. Like every week budget for the Task Force 241 was around like almost 4 million Afghani for each week, which is I don't know, a lot. It's a lot of money in US. If you do the calculation, it's going to be maybe I don't know, $100, maybe $1,000, maybe less and more. So there was a lot of money for just only food allocation for a unit in the country. Only in Kabul city, and so. The job was to just go after terrorists, high-value targets, not like low-level, targets in the villages, just high-value commanders, district governors, provincial governors, all these shadow governors, commanders, district commanders, judges. So all the the financial guy for the terrorist network. So always after these high-value targets. And so that was the main purpose of the Task Force 241. And when I previously when I said we weren't really answering to the Afghanistan, the NDS itself, on the original side, when I found out later, this is something that I found out later when I became top among the leadership, we were getting directly orders from the Afghan president and doing operation based on the like what he tells us to do. But because of his political problems, his opposition, he could not like publicly give these orders to all the units. So he had to, like, he had problems. There were human rights problem. There were opposition problem. They were, influence from Iran, Pakistan, and, of course, Russia, China. So he wanted to keep it just directly under his command, so that nobody else can influence the unit. The unit commander were two people from, not two people, 4 people from 2001 till 2021. For their security reasons, I'm not gonna.
Of course.
Because they live outside, but because they were the commander, the position of the commander was general. So because when you become a general, you're a political person in the country, then you can be easily mentioned and targeted. So the commander was a general, an Afghan general. And then, so we had these squadrons. You had the combat squadron that were always going in highways, like 100, 120 vehicles out doing operations. And you had the Lowas. Lowas was in the Kabul city. So Lowas was like 20, 25 vehicles. You go after suicide bombers. You go after these high-value targets that come into Kabul city, and that nobody knew about it. So we had this system that's called GSM. I never had this GSM experience with any other coalition unit. This was provided. Of course, everything supply-wise was provided to us by the U.S., not the Afghan government. The Afghan government didn't have the capacity, the power to do that. Yeah. And so, we had GSM system that we could track, the enemy or our targets through their phones. So the Lowas operation in the Kabul city was like this. You lock the target through their phone number. There was this big system that, when the target comes into the Kabul city, it pops up in the system that this phone is on. This phone is on either WhatsApp. We had the cybersecurity section that was working on their, social media platforms like WhatsApp, WeChat, and, Telegram, all these communication stuff, Facebook Messenger. And so we had the cybersecurity section that was working on that. And then the GSM team was responsible to lock the number, go after the target, and without doing any combat action thing, we would just capture the target inside the Kabul city. We were in low clothes. Low means low visibility for your audience. Like we were dressed up like just regular civilians in the city, that we could easily blend in with people. Our vehicles were different. You had sedan, you had SUVs, you had taxis, you had not buses, but like almost small mini buses. And just, when this convoy is going in the city, there were like around 800 meters of difference between each vehicle, sometimes more than that. So you wouldn't notice it's a convoy. You think like this is one car here, there's another car. And the windows were tinted, so you could not see inside the vehicles. And overall, the task force Task Force 241 was doing a great job when I saw it. I'm not saying this because to discredit any other unit everybody was doing the best they could, but to sum it up, like we could get, like when I was with the Afghan Special Forces, even when we were working with the U.S. Green Berets, like the ODA, we couldn't get the air support all the times. But with Task Force 241, the moment we stepped out of the wire, we had an ISR above our head, we had AC-130 above our head, the whole operation. And then as soon as if AC-130 wanted to go for a resupply, which is pretty rare for AC-130 to run out of fuel in one night or 10 hours operation, or more or less. And so if AC-130 was going to resupply, we had 2 Apaches coming and giving us air support. If the Apaches weren't available, we had the A-10s, the Warthog, or Warhog, as they call it. The A-10s would come from background, give us air support. This does not come, but
If you'd like to hear the rest of this episode and gain access to all of the episodes of The Voices of War, simply become a subscriber using the link in the show notes. As you know, I will not feature any ads on the show, which is made possible solely through the support of our subscribers. If you find value in the content, you can become one now.